The tablet is catalogued K.3375, British Museum, one fragment among thousands pulled from the ruins of Nineveh in the 1850s. For decades, no one read it. It sat filed beside grain receipts and tax records. Then a museum assistant began translating it, line by line, in 1872. What he found was not a myth. It was testimony, a name, a warning, instructions. A catastrophe survived in real time, 7 days sealed in total darkness, then a man drilling into the hull of the only thing keeping his family alive, not knowing what waited beyond it. This is that testimony, and it insists the flood's true ending has been misunderstood for 4,000 years. The fragment is catalogued K.3375 in the British Museum's Cuneiform collection, one piece among thousands recovered from the ruins of Nineveh in the 1850s. For decades it sat unread, filed alongside tax receipts and grain inventories. No one realised what it held. Then, in 1872, a museum assistant named George Smith began translating it, line by line. What he found was not a myth. It was testimony, structured the way testimony is structured. A name, a warning, a set of instructions. A catastrophe survived in real time. The name is Ziusudra. In the Sumerian version, that is his title. In the later Akkadian retelling, Tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh Epic, he becomes Utnapishtim, same flood, same man, passed through different scribal traditions across nearly 1,000 years. That alone is worth pausing on. A story does not survive a millennium of copying across 2 languages and 2 civilizations by accident. Something about it mattered enough to preserve exactly. The warning comes first. The god Ea speaks through the wall of a reed house, so that he is technically not breaking his oath of secrecy to the other gods. He tells Ziusudra the assembly has decided to erase humanity. The instructions that follow are not vague. A vessel built as a cube, sides measured at roughly 60 meters, 7 levels, each split into 9 compartments, 63 sealed chambers, bitumen inside and out, built in 7 days by workers paid in beer, sesame oil and wine. Fables do not itemize payroll. Fables do not specify pitch quantities or compartment counts. This reads like a construction record, because structurally it is one. The storm arrives on schedule. He sets the hour himself. Load the boat. Seal the door from the inside before that hour passes. Ziusudra loads his family, his craftsmen, and, the text says, the seed of every living creature. An image that reappears almost unchanged, in accounts separated from this one by well over 1,000 years. Then the door is sealed. Not left open. Not guarded. Sealed with bitumen from within, so that nothing more will pass in or out until someone inside chooses otherwise. What happens next shifts register entirely. The methodical listing of dimensions gives way to something closer to panic. The storm god Adad thunders inside the clouds. The gods of the underworld carry torches that turn the land dark as if fire itself has gone hostile to sight. Wind and flood move together, like a battle, over the people below. A brother can no longer see his brother. No one is recognizable from the sky above, because there is no longer a sky to look down from. Only water, uniform, total, in every direction. Here the text turns strange in a way modern readers tend to skip past. The gods themselves are terrified. Ishtar cries out like a woman in labour, regretting the order she helped approve. The Anunnaki, the senior gods, cower and weep, sitting hunched like dogs curled against a wall. This is not the language of judgment carried out with satisfaction. It is the language of an act that overran its author's intentions, a decision that turned out larger than the beings who made it. Inside the sealed vessel, none of this can be confirmed. There are no windows in the account, no report of what Ziusudra or his family could see, because there was nothing to see. For 7 days and nights the storm does not relent. The boat is thrown across a surface with no shore, no horizon, no fixed direction. Mesopotamian cosmology divided existence into ordered zones. Sky above, land in the middle, the freshwater abyss below. The flood does not simply flood the middle layer, it erases the lines between all three. Water above, water below. A wooden cube tumbling somewhere inside that undifferentiated mass, with no way for anyone inside to know whether they are still moving toward anything at all. The tablet does not record what was said inside the boat during those 7 days. It records only the outside, the storm, the terror of the gods, the totality of the erasure. Then, without transition, it notes the exact moment the storm stops. Not fades. Stops. The way a struck object stops when the force against it disappears. The wind falls silent. The flood, the text says, gives up its war, like a woman in childbirth easing at last. And then comes something the tablet treats as more significant than any of it, more significant than the storm's violence, more significant than the silence that follows, more significant even than the bare fact of survival. Ziusudra does not wait for rescue. He does not wait for land to reappear on its own. He turns toward the sealed hull that has kept his family alive through total darkness, and he begins to cut an opening into it, not knowing yet what, if anything, still exists on the other side. Consider what it means to cut into a hull that has kept out an ocean for 7 days. Ziusudra does not know, in the moment his tool first breaks the bitumen seal, whether he is opening a passage to air or inviting in the same water that erased everything else. The tablet does not dwell on his hesitation. It rarely dwells on interior states at all. It records actions, not feelings, which means the action itself has to carry the weight a feeling would otherwise explain. He drills. That is the verb the text preserves, not waits, not prays first. Drills, an act that assumes survival is worth testing rather than simply hoped for. To understand why this single action gets more attention than the flood's actual end, sit with what the 7 days inside would have been. No windows, no fixed point. A cube of wood 60 meters to a side, thrown across a surface with no shore and no visible sky, sealed from inside by the same hand that now reopens it. Mesopotamian cosmology organized existence into layers, the heavens above, the inhabited world in the middle, the cosmic fresh water below, the Abzu. The flood does not flood one layer. It collapses all three into a single undifferentiated mass. For 7 days from inside that cube, there is no way to know if the layers still exist at all, or whether the whole structure of the world has simply dissolved. This is the condition the drilling interrupts. Not water, not silence. A total absence of confirmed reality outside 4 sealed walls. When the opening is complete, the tablet's language shifts again, the same way it shifted when the storm first arrived. From record-keeping to something closer to reverence, Utu enters, the sun god. The text is specific. This is not daylight in some ambient sense. Utu is a deity with agency, responsible for justice, order, for the visibility that makes justice possible. A god who sees everything precisely because his rays reach everywhere the sky touches. When his light enters through the opening Ziusudra has cut, the text is not describing weather clearing. It is describing a god arriving inside a space that had been, for 7 days, entirely outside divine reach, outside sight, outside order, outside the world. Say this plainly, because it is easy to let it slide past as flourish. The flood's end and the world's restart are not the same event here. The storm stopping is a fact about weather. Utu entering the boat is a fact about order returning to a place order had been erased from. The rays do not simply illuminate the interior. In the logic of the text, they re-establish that the interior is part of the world again, visible, accounted for, no longer floating in an undifferentiated nowhere between the layers of a collapsed cosmos. Follow the sequence exactly as the tablet presents it, not as later retellings compress it. First, total darkness, 7 days, no reference point. Second, a human decision, not divine intervention, a choice made by the survivor himself, to cut into the sealed hull without knowing what waits beyond it. Third, light, identified as a god's presence rather than an ambient phenomenon, entering through that opening. The restart requires 3 things, in this order. Remove any one, and the sequence stops making sense. The flood alone does not restart anything, it only erases. The opening alone does nothing without something arriving through it. And Utu's arrival is not independent. The tablet is explicit that it comes after the opening exists through the opening because of it. What follows is Ziusudra's own action once the light has entered. He does not simply stand in the new brightness. He looks. The tablet records him surveying what the light now makes visible, a horizon he cannot yet fully trust, an expanse of water still without a clear edge, but for the first time, a world that can be seen rather than merely endured. Seeing, in this cosmology, is not passive. It is the beginning of the world being ordered again, because order and visibility are, in the logic of these texts, nearly the same concept. A world drowned in darkness has no order in it, whatever else is physically true about the water level. A world Utu's light can reach is a world where order has, at minimum, begun to be possible again. This is the moment the account insists on treating as central. More central than the storm's violence, more central than the gods' panic, more central even than survival as a bare fact. Not the flood ending, the light entering, everything that happens afterward, the search for land, the sacrifice, the gods' response to it, depends on this moment having occurred first, in this order, through this specific human act of cutting into the dark. What Ziusudra sees once Utu's light has entered is not solid ground. The tablet is careful here, and the care matters. He looks through the opening and finds water still without a visible edge. An expanse light now reveals, rather than one light has resolved. Visibility without resolution. That distinction sits at the centre of what happens next, because the text does not let the boat simply drift towards safety. It records a search, methodical, almost desperate, for the boundary between water and world that the flood had dissolved. The boat comes to rest on a mountain. Later versions name it Nimush, a peak whose exact location scholars still debate, though the debate is secondary to what the resting represents. The first fixed point since the storm began. For 6 days the boat holds there, caught on the mountain's shoulder, neither free nor grounded. On the 7th day, Ziusudra releases a dove. It flies out, finds nothing to land on, returns. He releases a swallow. Same result. Out, searching, back again. Still no perch anywhere in the visible world. Only when he releases a raven does the bird fail to return. Its absence is the first evidence in the entire account that solid, uncovered ground exists somewhere beyond the boat. Notice what this does to the earlier claim about light and order. Utu's rays entering the boat did not instantly produce a restored world. They produced the conditions under which restoration could be searched for. Visibility? Yes, not yet resolution. The birds do what light alone could not, locating the actual edge, testing the world rather than merely illuminating it. Order, in this account, is not delivered. It is assembled, piece by piece, through action taken inside the light, not passively received from it. When Ziusudra finally steps onto exposed ground, the tablet moves immediately to what he does next, and the choice of what to record here is as telling as anything earlier. He does not rest. He does not survey the wreckage with relief or grief, though surely both were available to him. He builds an altar. He makes an offering. Sweet reeds, cedar and myrtle, the tablet specifies, burn together, smoke rising from the mountaintop into open air for the first time since sky and water became one thing. And here the account does something that separates it from nearly every flood narrative told afterward. The gods do not arrive with composure. They arrive, the tablet says, like flies gathering over the sacrifice, a description of hunger, not majesty. These are the same gods who, days earlier, cowered and wept at the scale of the destruction they authorized. Now they crowd around the rising smoke because it is, apparently, the first offering any of them have received since the flood began. Divine beings in this cosmology require what humans provide exactly as much as humans require what the gods provide in return. The erasure did not just threaten humanity, it threatened the reciprocal structure holding the entire cosmos together, gods included. Here the tablet allows a fracture to surface among the gods themselves. Enlil, who commanded the flood's assembly, arrives, furious. Not that the destruction failed, but that any human survived it at all. He wanted total erasure. Not the partial negotiated survival that Ea's whispered warning through a reed wall had made possible. Ea does not apologize for the warning. He argues, instead, that total erasure was never the correct instrument, that a flood aimed at all of humanity, guilty and innocent alike, was itself the error, that more precise punishments existed and should have been used. This is not a minor theological footnote, it is the text's own critique of the catastrophe it just spent its central sections describing, delivered by one god to another, in front of the smoke of the first sacrifice made in the new world. What resolves the argument is not really an argument at all. Enlil, faced with the fact of survival, and the smoke rising toward him regardless of his fury, changes what the survival means rather than reversing it. He takes Ziusudra and his wife and grants them a status the text describes as being made like the gods, immortal, set apart, placed to dwell at the distant mouth of the rivers. No longer entirely of the world he has just watched drown and re-emerge, not a return to the old order, the establishment of a new one, with a new category of being inserted at its threshold, the single human link between the world before the water and the world the light revealed. The tablet ends this account without lingering on triumph. Ziusudra receives his new status and vanishes from the ongoing world of mortal affairs, present only as a distant figure other seekers will later travel toward, hoping he still remembers what the old world was and how the new one actually began. What remains is the shape of the sequence itself, preserved across 1,000 years of copying, through at least 2 languages and 2 civilizations, by scribes who had every opportunity to simplify it and never did. They kept the 7 days of undifferentiated darkness. They kept the specific act of drilling, performed without certainty of what waited beyond it. They kept Utu entering by name, not weather clearing, but a god arriving somewhere he had been entirely absent from. They kept the birds, sent out one after another, because even light does not resolve a world on its own. It only makes searching for that world's edges possible again. And they kept the argument among the gods afterward, unresolved in any comfortable sense. E's accusation against Enlil was never actually answered. It was simply overtaken by smoke rising from an altar neither god could ignore. Return briefly to the fragment in the British Museum, the one George Smith sat with in 1872, translating a language no living person had spoken in over 2,000 years. He's reported to have become so overtaken upon reaching the flood account that he began undressing in the reading room, not out of impropriety, because recognition arrived faster than composure could keep pace with it. A European scholar, in a Victorian museum, encountering a catastrophe and a rescue that predated the text he'd grown up reading by well over 1,000 years, told with the same beats, the same structure, the same insistence that light entering a sealed space mattered more than water receding from one. That recognition deserves more than a single startle afternoon. 2 accounts, produced by civilizations that did not know of each other's existence in any way modern history can trace. Both insist the flood's true ending was not a weather event. Both insist someone inside a sealed vessel had to act, cut, open, choose exposure over waiting, before anything resembling a new world could begin. Both insist that what arrived through that opening was not simply light in the physical sense, but light as a name, as a presence, as a force with enough agency to make a space visible again after it had been erased from visibility entirely. This is not the kind of detail 2 unconnected traditions invent by coincidence. It is the kind of detail that suggests something about how survival itself was experienced, remembered, and then protected across generations who had every reason to let the specifics blur, and chose instead to keep them precise. There is a version of this story that flattens all of it into a single sentence. It rained, and then it stopped raining. That version is not wrong. It is simply incomplete in the specific way that matters most. It treats the flood as an event that happened to the world rather than a rupture the world had to be rebuilt from, piece by piece, action by action, by someone who did not wait passively for the water to recede on its own schedule. Ziusudra's drilling is the detail that version leaves out. It is the detail the original tablet refuses to let go of, no matter how many scribes copied it, no matter how many centuries passed between the writing and the museum shelf where it eventually surfaced. So the question worth carrying away from a fragment older than most of what any culture calls ancient is not whether a flood occurred, or whether a boat survived it, or even whether a man named Ziusudra existed in any form the archaeological record can confirm. It is narrower than that, and stranger. When does a catastrophe actually end? At the moment destruction stops, or at the moment someone inside it decides to cut into the dark without knowing what waits on the other side and something answers by entering. The tablet has an answer. It has had one for roughly 4,000 years, sitting first in a library at Nineveh, then buried in rubble, then boxed in a museum basement, then translated by a man who could not stay composed when he reached the part about the opening and the light. The water stopped on its own. The world did not restart until someone let something back in. The flood narrative has survived for thousands of years not because ancient people wanted to preserve a story about rain, but because they believed they were preserving a story about what comes after devastation. That distinction matters. Catastrophes happen throughout history. Civilizations collapse. Empires disappear. Cities burn. Libraries are buried beneath sand and stone. Yet again and again, what survives is not merely the record of destruction, but the record of the first person willing to step back into an uncertain world. Perhaps that is why the tablet spends so little time celebrating survival itself. Survival, by itself, changes nothing. A person can survive and remain trapped by fear forever. The flood was over long before the world truly returned. The decisive moment came when Ziusudra chose to challenge the darkness rather than accept it. His act was small compared with the storm that came before it. One man, one tool, one opening cut into a wall of wood and bitumen. Yet according to the oldest version of the story we possess, that single decision mattered more than 7 days of divine destruction. Think about how unusual that is. Ancient literature usually glorifies gods, kings, or battles. Here the turning point is none of those things. It is curiosity overcoming fear. It is action overcoming paralysis. The gods may have decided the flood, but they did not decide when the New World began. The tablet quietly gives that responsibility to a human being. Maybe that is why scribes copied this account century after century, without removing these strange details. They could have shortened it. They could have written simply that the waters receded and life continued. Instead, they preserved the drilling into the hull. They preserved the arrival of light. They preserved the birds searching for land. Every generation judged those details too important to lose. Across changing languages, changing kingdoms, and changing religions, those moments remained untouched. Even today, archaeologists continue debating where the flood occurred, whether it reflects a historical event, or whether several regional floods merged into a single tradition over centuries of storytelling. Those questions matter to historians, but the tablet itself seems interested in a different question entirely. It asks not where the flood happened, but how a world begins again after everything familiar has disappeared. That question has never become obsolete. Every generation experiences its own version of standing inside a sealed vessel, unable to see what lies outside. Every generation faces moments when certainty disappears, when familiar landmarks vanish, and when the future feels as featureless as an endless sea. The ancient scribe who pressed these words into wet clay understood that feeling 4,000 years ago. Remarkably, the emotion survives even if the people who first described it do not. Perhaps that is the greatest achievement of the tablet. It preserved not only a story but an experience, fear, isolation, waiting, uncertainty. Then finally, the courage to open the barrier, separating safety from possibility. That is why George Smith reportedly reacted so dramatically when he translated these lines in 1872. He was not simply reading an ancient flood story. He was witnessing a voice from 4,000 years earlier describing something that still felt immediately human. Across millennia, across forgotten languages, across the collapse of entire civilizations, the sequence remained recognizable. Darkness. A choice. Light. Whether one reads the tablet as history, theology, literature, or myth, that sequence refuses to disappear. It has endured longer than kingdoms, longer than empires, longer than the libraries that once protected it. The clay cracked, the city fell, the language died, yet the message survived. The flood may have ended when the rain stopped, but according to the oldest surviving account, the world began again only when someone found the courage to open the darkness and allowed the light to enter.